On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Mayuresh Hajirnis. He's the Director of Engineering at Altruist. We're going to be talking about seeing the complete picture of software development. So Mayuresh has a very interesting background. He started in QA and SDET, and now he's a Director of Engineering. So we're going to talk about how his background and how his overall experiences within QA and SDET has shaped his views of engineering as a whole. And we're going to hopefully get as much of that into this episode as we can. Mayuresh, thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. What do you guys do at Altruist before we start actually diving into the topic?
So Altruist is a self-clearing custodian. It's a platform for financial advisors to manage, to onboard, manage their clients' portfolio. We support over 20 different account types. Yeah, I think like that in a nutshell, that's what Altruist does.
Awesome. Okay. So obviously I mentioned you started off your career within the QA space as being an SDET before moving into engineering. Obviously you have a computer science, software engineering, education. So you come into that with a deep background in technology. Just out of curiosity, just kind of a jumping off standpoint, when you got into the QA SDET world, into automation engineering, was your thought that eventually you'd move into software engineering development, or were you just enjoying that part of the process of the life cycle?
Honestly, it actually a lot has to do with the opportunities that came my way. So Yahoo back then was a pretty big company. I got an internship opportunity. Actually, before getting into Yahoo, like I had pretty much software development background. So all of my other internships or other jobs back in India were also pretty much software development focused. So Yahoo was my first break into QA automation, tooling, framework development. And I started liking that. So for next few years, as I grew in my career, Yahoo, Citygrid Media, eHarmony, and even Ticketmaster, right? I stuck to the roles which were more related to QA automation, tooling framework, partially getting into the DevOps world with developing CI/CD pipelines, working with them, working across the company to kind of set the standards of how do we take software from the code to the deployment and support, including the observability. So that was an interesting period where I was able to actually learn a lot about the software development lifecycle in general. And of course, that played a huge role when I, again, moved back to leading the software engineering teams, in a traditional sense, which were developing the products and features for end customers.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I was asking that is, I guess a lot of times people, when they move into QA and SDET roles, obviously it's through opportunity. Finding their way into the, I guess, core engineering side isn't as easy. Obviously, there's a little bit of a label or stigma that, hey, you're more of a QA or an SDET person. Getting into that software, that core side is a bit of a chasm. I guess when you were looking to cross over, did you face any of that, or was it pretty straightforward to kind of bridge the gap into core engineering?
I did have to face a little bit of weight, right? So I expressed my desire to the leadership at Thala. It took some time to find the right opportunity for me to take on a couple of teams that were with a new product launch for Thala, just a savings account, debit card products. And that was my first opportunity after a long time leading software development teams. But yes, it did take a little bit of patience, some waiting game to get into that role. And actually there was a period, almost 6 to 9 months, I was supporting both QA and development until we found like a right leader on the QA side to take over. So yeah, it was an interesting, challenging period, managing both, but exciting at the same time because like that period gave me a lot of perspective across the entire development, QA, deployment cycles.
And maybe share with everyone some of the differences. So obviously, if someone's on the engineering side listening to this, they might interface with the QA or the SDET or the whatever that the team topology might look like, that part of the team. In terms of managing a QA or SDET team, in terms of being a people manager, and then now you're a people manager, director of engineering, Altruist, were there any differences between the two teams you're leading? And I guess maybe obviously there's technical differences, but maybe we can also talk about really the people management side. Is there a difference between leading those two teams, and maybe what are some of the key differences you noticed?
Definitely. So it's like QA in a traditional sense, right? So the way I led the QA teams was a little bit different, as in it's like even back in like early 2010s, right? I actually developed the teams which were very focused on the automation, right? And getting automation done as the feature is being developed is challenging. It's not easy, right? Like business wants to deliver the features as quickly as possible. So a lot of times the challenge becomes like, hey, can we just do some manual testing right now, roll this feature out, and then on day two, we'll get to that automation. But guess what? The day two never comes a lot of times, right? Like, so we want to make sure that like we plan in a way that software test automation is a first class citizen, right? It's not an afterthought, right? So that's something that I'm super proud that like we were able to do pretty well at eHarmony, even at Ticketmaster and at Tala when I was leading the QA teams. So we actually treated test automation as part of the delivery, right? Not as something that like we can do after we deliver the features. And that played a big role because like that's a culture shift, that's a mindset shift, right? Like, so you're not just training your teams, but you're also actually getting leadership involved, getting their buy-in, right? And like helping them understand that why we need to do it this way, right? Instead of just like thinking of automation as something that can be done later, right? So once you establish that kind of culture, the next steps become like way smoother. You can definitely roll out the features faster, right? Like, so initially there is a period where like things might slow down, but afterwards you actually produce the features with higher confidence because anything that breaks can easily be caught during the regression cycle, which is fully automated. And even your new features are being automated in terms of the testing. So the long-term gains of having the automation being done at the same time as the product development actually goes a long way. So that's something that really helped me further in my career, even when I started taking on like the product development teams, right? Like, so because like I had that empathy about how important QA processes are, how important the automation is, right? So even though at times that QA engineers didn't really directly report into me, it became really straightforward for me to get them to do the automation at the same time as the product development is happening.
A couple of things to maybe unpack in there, because I think you said something that was interesting. You said to raise the level of the QA estate team to first class citizen. I think there's a lot of teams, right? So DevOps, SREs, there's a lot of shared services teams, QA estate, that obviously their work is not seen as clearly as other teams, right? And I think this is a strong. This has been. I think I've had other guests talk about this, but not from a QA step perspective. When you look at that, and you were actually, running these QS teams. How were you able to bring some of that attention to your team, or were you? Because obviously you want to celebrate the successes. You're contributing as much as any other team to successful product feature launches. How did you help people, or how did you help your team, see some of that success and some of the accolades from doing good work?
Various platforms, right? So first of all, like, testing and quality is QA's responsibility, is not something that we can live with, right? Like, quality is everyone's responsibilities, right? Like, so evangelizing that across engineering team, including QA, is a must-have, right? So when I was leading the QA automation teams at Tala, what I realized that is, like, the dev to QA ratio is never going to be enough, right? Like, so we need to get devs buy-in to actually help with the automation when necessary, right? Like, so I was leading a team of like roughly 30 estates, QA slash estates at Thala, and I realized that, like, there are several teams where there are like 5, 6, 7 developers, and only one estate is trying to support all of them, right? Like, so that's always going to be a struggle, right? But what we found out was, like, developers are also keen on delivering features on time with quality. So when you get their buy-in, right, like, help them understand how the automation works, right, what we are covering and how we are covering that, they were onboarded to help with the test automation, and then that became less of a burden on the dedicated estate on the team, and he or she became the mentor for that team, right? Like, so the rest of the developers were also contributing to the automation wherever possible, and like that's where, like, I go back to what I said earlier, is just treating QA and automation as the first class citizen, right? Like, so you basically start proving that in your day-to-day life, and then that starts, it's like, it's not just QA who are trying to showcase that, like, hey, we have this 80 plus 90 plus percentage of automation coverage. It was the entire team, not just QA, right? Like, the developers were also keen into proving that, into ensuring that we have adequate test coverage to release our features with confidence, with close to 100% confidence in production. And then you have more than just the estates as the spokesperson for how automation is helping us drive faster, right, without compromising on quality. You get buy-in from developers, you get buy-in from development managers, product people are looking at what's happening, right? Like, next thing you know, your entire team truly believes in not just what you are doing, but how you're doing the software development.
And I want to talk a little bit, and I think those are some great insights, because I think, as you mentioned, making sure the organization sees the value in that. I think that's something I think a lot of non-core engineering teams run into, and I think it seems like you did a lot of education, help bring that attention to your team. When it comes to your role now as a director of engineering, how do you use some of that? Because you mentioned you have a different picture, right? Because obviously when you say that, you have, you worked on the QA, you said QA and testing is the responsibility of every engineer, but that's a part of their job. As the director of engineering responsible for shipping code and releasing code, what changes for you with your experience within QA and SDET?
So the education that I did back in the days when I was director of QA and estate is something that I reflect on, is something that, like, as a director of engineering, right, like, I look at how we were able to successfully roll out features with 90 plus percentage of the test coverage and automated test. And if I was able to do that as a director of QA or estate, right, like, there's no reason why I shouldn't be pushing for the same strategy when I'm working as a director of engineering, right? Like, so mentoring not just QA, but like developers, ensuring that they understand the importance of completing the automated test as part of the feature delivery, and how we roll out our features with like 90 plus percentage of the automation test coverage is something that's not just like a nice to have, but it further enhances the quality of the features that we are rolling out, gives us immense confidence. The bug fixes are very easy because they're not like we are sure that like these are not gonna break something unintentionally. When you have like a large percentage of manual tests going on, right, and like there are like some production hot fixes that need to go in, you're always scared making changes to your code because you don't have confidence, you don't have adequate time to do all the manual testing, like to spend 2-3 days in regression cycles. And unfortunately, you don't have enough test coverage in the automated test, right? Like, so that actually leaves you as an engineer, or like me as a director of engineer, in a tricky position where we're rolling out something that we don't have fully entire confidence that it'll not break anything else unintentionally. So just that thought, right? Like that scary thought that we shouldn't have to live with that, right? Like, so that's something that's always at the back of my mind, and that drives me and my team towards ensuring the QA processes and the test automation is being treated as of like equal importance as our unit test or integration test that developers are writing.
I like that a lot, and I it's interesting how different backgrounds within engineering draws different strengths, different viewpoints. I guess for you making the shift and making the change to the engineering side, what did you have to? What was your ramp up? What was your learning curve? Right, obviously, you mentioned Atala. You got some projects to go through. Start focusing on this bigger role. If someone's listening to this and going, "Hey, I'm in the QA and SDET space. I'd love to move into, core engineering role." What advice do you have for them to start looking for some opportunities to gain those skills and round out their abilities?
Great question. So, in my case, I never really cut the ties with the product development itself, right? Like, so I was always very keen on understanding what's the design of the feature, right? Like, what's the architecture? What are the design choices that we are making on the development side? I would go through the entire like feature code base, like as an estate back in the days, to understand that in detail. And my test cases were based on not just what the product specs were written, but also how our code was written, right? Like, so that helped me a lot getting into the granular details and having a really thorough suite of test cases ready. But like, so that really worked out well for me because I never really gave up on my development background. So that's something that I would highly encourage everyone, like in the estate space. Like, don't just focus on the automation, but also try to understand the features, the application code that you're writing the automated test for, right? So don't treat everything as a black box. Yes, like you will write your test cases based on the product specs in the beginning, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have access to the code base. You shouldn't be involved in the code reviews that developers are writing. In fact, like one really good initiative that I took when I was leading the QA and estate teams is we made it mandatory for one QA or whoever the lead QA on that team or estate on that team was as the mandatory code reviewer. And the other way around, we actually got developers onboarded and got their buy-in to be the code reviewer for estate's test cases implementation. So it's like they both would understand each other's code very well, like would provide feedback. Hey, I'm not covering this particular code path. And it's like that will help the estate, whereas like estate would have early insights into what could potentially break based on the product specs, right? Like, so even before that code merges, SDETs were able to provide insightful feedback that help developers to fix the issues like in very early, right? And like famously, we call that as a shift left. Like we didn't have that terminology then. Like it's just something that we came up with that eventually became shift left. But yeah, anyway, coming back to the point, I believe right, like that kind of interest that spiked in me to understand that code better definitely helped me transitioning into this role. It was like once I got the opportunity, it was fairly smooth transition. Yes, of course, there are other challenges such as like you're working with more stakeholders, right? Like you're working with customer support, marketing, sales, um, other product leadership and design leadership to drive the initiatives, come up with the roadmap planning, tactical planning, strategic planning, etc. Part of that was not something that I did regularly when I was leading the QA and SDET teams. So yeah, that's definitely the difference. But I wouldn't call that out as like a big challenge. You just naturally get used to it as you start doing that more often.
I love the perspective. I love, the insights, because obviously, if especially this episode, I think if somebody's from the engineering team, they do work with the QA team a lot. And I think you shared a lot of what you learn and some of those transferables, and hopefully people have kind of listened to that. And as well, if someone is sitting in the QA and estate space and they want to move into, you know, into engineering, that's interesting. I guess for you've made the transition. You're director of engineering. What do you have on your roadmap? What else do you want to learn to grow your skill set out of curiosity?
Yeah, I definitely want to continue on this path, like get into more senior leadership positions, like help the business grow, like move them in a positive direction, right? Like really learn aspects from finance and product and sales and marketing, right? Like all these other departments that like I'm working with them, but like having empathy for what they do is really crucial because like a lot of times we focus on the external customers, right? Like, but we end up realizing that like there are other teams within our space which are underserved, right? Like, so they have like they're going through a lot of like day-to-day pain points, and engineering can help them a lot, right? Like, so how do you understand their pain points? Like, how do you come up with like alongside product leadership? How do you come up with the solutions for them so that you improve their operational efficiency, right? Like, so that eventually impacts the business in a positive way. That's something that like I started learning like fairly recently. So yeah, I would say, of course, there are like way more things to learn as I get into the next role, like more senior leadership roles. Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Awesome, Mayuresh. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, kind of what you learned in moving from, like QA stat world to software engineering leadership role. If somebody out there is listening to this and have a follow-up question, they want to reach out to you to get your advice, is there a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me via email. My email is mayuresh.hajirnis@gmail.com. Obviously, can feel free to send me a connection request on LinkedIn. Happy to chat. Happy to help anybody who is interested in this transition or need any pointers, any more details. Happy to help.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Amir. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you. All right, that's it. The end of this episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think this is a great episode for most engineering people to listen to. If you're in QA SDET, I think it's fantastic for you. I think Mayuresh shared a lot of his insights in terms of how he made the journey from QA SDET to software engineering leadership, and as well as his viewpoints has changed. He has a different background, and that's an add to his teams, and hopefully it's a great episode for you guys to share with others who could benefit from listening to it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Please follow the podcast if you are not. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.